In this episode, we have David Mitchell from AFX Research, a leading title research company, to discuss the common challenges in title research and property liens. David will share his insights on the nationwide operational challenges, research processes, and the importance of modernizing historical land records. We will explore every aspect of title research and how lenders can protect their interests despite legal changes.
So each county has their own rules of what can be recorded, how the document has to look, how it's stamped, the size of the paper, the whole deal. It's a very antiquated system. Great example, anything that's like municipality owned or state owned or federally owned, there's generally thousands, literally thousands of documents you have to sift through to get to what you're doing. So the complexity can vary. And in effect, now, all online records for both assessor records and recorder records in the state of New Jersey have been pulled offline. Everything.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the Construction Lending Podcast. I'm Sean Ferris with Lien, and we have a special guest today, very special guest, Dave Mitchell from AFX, a title research company. And AFX has an integration with Lien. We've had a long relationship with AFX, so it's great to have Dave on the show. Dave, welcome.
Thank you very much, Sean, for having me on. I'm excited to talk about title research, something I'm very passionate about. I know it may not be everybody's first interest, but it's definitely one of mine. So thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
No, this is great. I think that, when we think of our audience of, construction lenders out there, people that participate in this, construction finance and construction loan disbursements, even contractors and inspectors, this world that we operate in, is very nuanced. And what I love about title research and endorsements and title updates and the complexity here is, it's so complicated. You guys make it very simple, and I'm really, we'll dive into this a little bit more into the podcast, but I'm really interested in learning more about, how the sausage is made. We kind of take for granted, we click a button and all of a sudden, in a few minutes, we get a title update back and we know if there's any liens on a property. But, what really happens behind the scenes and what the, how it works is just really of interest to me. And I think it's also of interest to a lot of our listeners. But before we dive in, really curious about, AFX and how you guys got going and, what led you to AFX to begin with.
It's a really interesting story, because if you asked me when I went to college if I would end up in title research, there's no way I would have said yes. So, how I fell into this, I had actually been entrepreneurial most of my life. I had started a couple of businesses that did differing levels of success. And when I wanted to start having children, I wanted to move back to the town I grew up in. And so I sold my business I had, which was actually down in Mexico. I sold that business, did pretty well there, and decided to move back where I grew up. And I was looking for kind of the next thing I was going to do. And I was looking around for different businesses, and they had one, which was AFX, owned by another gentleman. His name is David Pellegrinelli, still a mentor of mine very much. And he was looking for a director of business development. This was, 12 or 15 years ago now. And so I looked at it. What interested me is he sold to the Nationwide this product, which I didn't know a whole lot about at the time, which was title research. And so he was an early adopter into domain names. So think in 2000, he bought every domain around title search, California title search, Illinois title search, Florida title search. He had every domain you can possibly imagine. And was doing title research. And so most of his stuff was consumer-based things. So people buying at foreclosure auctions would go like, I'm going to go bid at a foreclosure auction. They went to title, they searched Google for titlesearch.com and found AFX. Flash forward to not that long later, I was hired, thought that wasn't a great business model. I wanted to look more for B2B business. So we kind of, at that point, went into really three markets that came around, which was insurance, not just title insurance, but also homeowners insurance. So if a home burns down somewhere around the country, that homeowners insurance policy would hire AFX to verify that their insured had an insurable interest and who the bank was. Because if your home is like mine, I don't own a whole lot of my house. The bank owns most of my house. So they would put a check and say David Mitchell and B of A. And so they would hire us to verify all that information. We also Do environmental due diligence research for phase one environmental site assessments. We do that nationwide as well. Do a ton of government contracting with the IRS, the DOJ, the SEC. So if you don't pay your taxes and they're going to foreclose on your house because you're not paying your taxes, they're going to verify who else is interested on that house. And so the IRS will hire us to do that. As that's one case example of why they would do it. And then now more recently, we've got involved with Land Gorilla. We do construction loan lending. We do stuff around refis as well as HELOCs. So anything that doesn't need to be an insured product, we're going to do. We do work with title insurance companies to some extent, but not a ton. So that's kind of how we can have changed the business from when I started in it to now. We now do almost nothing that is consumer based. Everything's B2B on this end. So that's kind of how I ended up here. Is it's a long path, but I'm very happy to be here. Love the business I'm in.
Very, very exciting. You mentioned kind of insurable, everything but an insurable product. And before we kind of dive into that, the differences there, kind of give us a lay of the land of what title research looks like and what the different types of companies that are out there that are doing this.
So yeah, it's an interesting thing. So realize in the country, there's 3,600 in different recording venues in the country. So the documents aren't recorded on a state level. They are very rarely, in Hawaii is a great case, but mostly they're going to be recorded on a county level. Some cases a parish level. If you're in Louisiana, for instance, some very rare cases it's going to be recorded on a city level. So wherever a property is located, there's going to be a recording venue you need to do the research. And maybe sometimes there's multiple that you go into. And it's just kind of done differently all around the country. And so that's the case. You have to understand where a property is located, what is needed to do the research on the ownership for that specific property. It's really, the variance is pretty great. It's not a set way to do it across the country.
Now, when you think about title research, right? That's the process of, showing up at the parish or county recorder's office or, whatever that jurisdictional authority is for that particular area. What do? Knock on the door, ring the doorbell, and say, "Hey, what's going on over here at this address?" Like, how does that even work?
So it's interesting, and again, so there's a lot of variance because there's so many different jurisdictions. But in general, title research is done. You're going to the county recorder's office. Again, we'll just keep it as common as possible. You walk into the county recorder's office, and you're researching by the owner's name. So
wait, not by the property.
No, not at all. So not at the property. So there are some counties, I mean, just for clarity, there are some counties that you can research by property or by APN, so the assessor's parcel number. But the vast majority, the research will be done by the owner's name. So for instance, I live in a small county. You would go to the county recorder's office. I know there is at least one other David Mitchell in this county who I've met personally. So if you went in there, you would look up any property owned by David Mitchell. So it would pull up my home and this other gentleman with the same exact name. And the way you would differentiate the two is you'd have to read the legal description to say, okay, this is the property I'm actually searching for and not the other one. So you would pull up, I would have a mortgage, I'd have an assignment from that mortgage. A lot of different documents would be found. And then I would have to read through all those, read the legal to determine this pile of documents over here is for the property I'm interested in. These other documents are not. Then you'd read through and see which ones still affect the property. For instance, I refied my home. So that means there was a mortgage recorded. When I refied it, there was actually another document called a satisfaction or a release was recorded. I would have found both those documents, said, okay, this mortgage no longer applies to my property. And then I'd find the new mortgage. And so my title report that I would provide to Land Gorilla would show only the new mortgage, because those other two documents, while I did find them, they just no longer affect the property. So those would kind of be set to the side.
So measured from a certain point in time, like the last recorded deed of trust.
Well, we normally, for the work we do with Land Gorilla, we go to when the owner purchased the property, whether that was 2 years ago or 20 years ago. We're going to go from that point forward in time. So everything.
Refinance?
Yeah, even if it's refinance, we go from whenever that current owner bought the property forward in time to look for mortgages, taxes, liens, and judgments. So anything that could affect the property still. So again, a mortgage that's been refied, we will have seen those documents, read them through, and realized that they don't affect the property anymore. It's the same as a contractor's lien or mechanic's lien you can put on a property, but if it's been released, we will have found both documents. They're still recorded in the land records, but we'll put them together and say, okay, these, because of this lien and this release, they no longer affect the property. So it will not show up on our report. It's not that we didn't find it, but they no longer negatively affect the property.
What's really interesting And I'm sure somebody else has got to be thinking the same question. Why are things organized by a person's name, right? We're talking about county records and we're talking about properties that have a specific location. So logically, you would think the property would have a file folder and there'd be things that go inside of it, but that's not the case. And why is it that it's organized mainly by person or
Right.
entity?
So it's interesting. It's interesting you say that. So in today's technology, you would imagine you type in 123 Main Street, Los Angeles, California, and a title report. You'd say title report for 123 Main Street, and it would just pop up for you in Google. I think if we could start the land records over, that is actually a possible outcome we could have. The problem is we have 200 years of history, long before things were ever digitized, to go through this. So I do know other countries that are actually starting their land records that we would think are well behind our technology, are starting in way better ways using blockchain and different things like that. But because we have this antiquated way of doing, that's how they started doing it 200 years ago. And it has not changed much since then. There are databases and things you can buy into for research purposes that you can search by APN, again, assessor's parcel number, if you don't know what that is, or the address. But it is just because there are 3,600, just think of it, we would need, to make this really efficient, you would need 3,600 counties or recording venues to get together and all agree on what's the best method to do it. And that's, in my opinion, that's just not going to happen. So each county has their own rules of what can be recorded, how the document has to look, how it's stamped, the size of the paper, the whole deal. It's a very antiquated system, and getting these government agencies to become more efficient is just a pretty heavy lift. It's been what we have seen. Now, there's places that are very efficient, but there's also places, I know how hard this is to believe. You have to walk into the county recorder's office, open up a book, search through the index for the names, which will say David Mitchell, look on page, book 47, page 232, walk over to that book, pull it out, and make a photocopy of that. And that is the deed of the property. That is still how research is done in many counties. Probably about 30% of the counties, that is still how things are done across the country.
Like the Dewey Decimal System for libraries that used to do that before they had computers.
It is, I mean, I'm a pretty tech forward person, and it is hard to believe that is actually still how things are. We, as a company, still have researchers in the field that fax documents into us. I don't know if you remember what a fax machine was. Like, they kind of went away about a decade ago. They are still used in title research.
Oh man. So taking a step back, right? And if I'm a construction loan administrator and I'm, managing a portfolio, or I'm a construction lender managing a portfolio, and I need a title update, and I click that button, and it sounds like, your team goes to work, right? And that research is accumulated and, summarized up, and you send that back. Besides the research of going through everything, like, what else is involved in that process?
Well, I mean, so the research itself. So when you put in an address, the very first thing, I mean, this is our system, not how everyone works, but just how ours is. When you send us an address and with a borrower's name on it, we're going to ping a third-party database to basically look to see if we can find an APN or parcel number, look for an assessed owner's name on the property, all this thing, find out what county the property's in, and then our system that runs our software is proprietary. Will look for who is the best researcher in that county to get that work done the most accurate and the quickest possible. And it's based on a whole bunch of factors that updates every single day in our system. We will then send that researcher that information. And there are some places it could be online. So that research could be done honestly anywhere on the planet. There's other places you have to walk into the recorder's office to do that research. And our system knows, based county by county, updated daily, where the best place to do that is. They're going to do the research to pull all the documentation out about ownership, mortgages, liens, and judgments. For our system, it's going to come back, and we're actually going to do some QC on it to verify if it's coming back how we think it should. Now, obviously, if it's a construction loan and you've provided a borrower, we're going to assume that is the owner of the property. So if those two things don't match, we're going to double check. We're going to do some double check on that. It's possible they could have sold the property. It's unlikely, but it's possible. So if certain things don't match up, we'll do a QC check on it. But if all those things match up, for your system, we're going to ping you only if there's something negative besides the mortgage on it. So if there is a lien or a judgment that has happened since that loan was originated, we'll ping you and let you know that there is something going on with that.
And what are the typical things that you find when, you don't see a lot of liens getting filed, but you go out, you do some research, you run into situations where, hey, we don't even find the mortgage, we don't find the borrower, you find a bunch of liens. Like what is the typical findings when you're doing the research?
Well, it's a good question. So again, the research is done by generally speaking, by owner name.
Okay.
So the most common mistake is that somehow it was recorded against a different owner or a different spelling even of the name, which sounds interesting. But like there's a lot of different ways to write Sean, right? You could, which way did we write Sean? So our researchers know if we think the owner's name is Sean Ferris, we're going to use all the variations of Sean Ferris as how we're trained to do it. But it's human work both on the research end as well as on the bank who's recording the mortgage, right? So there's possible human error going on all across. So that's probably the most common error, is that there's just a recording error on, like, it was not put under the right name, the right spelling. The other thing you can have, David Mitchell, for instance, is a pretty common name, especially in a big city. If it's recorded against just David Mitchell and not with a middle initial, for instance, we might come up with a lot of liens against David Mitchell, which isn't actually our David Mitchell in this example. So our report will show all possible variations of that. And then we're going to have to go back potentially to the borrower and say, we need to have a middle initial or a social security number to like pull off some of these potential liens. The other thing that's probably the most common lien we'll see recorded after somebody gets a construction loan is a federal tax lien. If you may not know that somebody has past due taxes, that can get recorded against their property. If it's recorded in the county by statute, in most counties, it will automatically record against any property they own in that county. So federal tax liens are something we're looking for. State tax liens as well are common, probably the most common we're going to find, as well as contractors liens or mechanical liens for people who did work on a property and were not paid and it didn't get released. So those are the most common things we'll find on construction loans.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, what would you say, to the audience of construction lenders out there? Are there any best practices or recommendations? They're organizing and setting up their loan file. The borrower information is pretty much established from their loan origination platform and should be character to character 100% accurate, or a loan may have 4 borrowers. Like,
right,
best practices that you would recommend to them, like, hey, always make sure that it's
it seems like a little detail, but always include the middle initial. It sounds like a very little detail, but that's going to help us eliminate tons of options. So if we go through again, my middle initial is an L, so the other David Mitchell in town is not an L. If there was a lien against him and it was just recorded as David Mitchell, we wouldn't know. So putting the middle initial in, it's a tiny little detail, but it will help the title researcher a ton to sift through, particularly in, the larger the population area of a county, the more documents we're going to have to go through, the more potential David Mitchells there are in that area. So the more information you can give us, the better. If you want to write out the entire middle name, that's also helpful. If the deed itself only has an L, that's fine, but the deed might have the full middle name, and that will help us eliminate any other David L. Mitchell that we have out there. So yeah, the more information you can give to the title researcher, full name is very, very helpful. Very helpful.
One thing I really like what you guys do in your reports is you kind of summarize everything up. And you get big bold letters, no liens found, right? Now, if there are liens found, or somebody just wanted to get into the weeds a little bit more and understand what the details of the report contained, how would you go about advising somebody, like, how to learn more about what's contained in the report?
Well, that's a great question. So the report itself, the report we provide, most of the time, hopefully, we're not going to really find anything negative against the property. Most of the time, the borrower's not doing anything wrong. There's no new liens, no judgments or anything. But if there is, we always include a copy of that documentation. So if there is a lien that's now recorded against the property, whatever the case can be, that we search for every type of recorded lien, but whatever that is, you'll have a copy of that document. Same if it's a judgment. From there, you're going to have some documentation to read through. And again, because every county and state is different, I can't advise specifically what to do on any case, but I would, once you have that information, I think you can read through it, do some research yourself on what state you're in, what jurisdiction you're in, and what may apply. A good, for instance, is judgments, you know, state to state, they're going to stay on the property a different amount of time. In California, where I reside, it's 10 years. A judgment is still against you and against your property, and varies state to state. So you can see when it's recorded, all the information will be on there, when it was recorded, who it's against, and you can get an idea when it's going to come off. So it would be something that's kind of specific to the instance of whatever that recorded document is.
Would you say that, you know, when we think about, you know, getting a title update and you doing title research, how does the different, you know, I don't want to say product types, but different requests look like, say, between like a single family residential property versus multifamily versus, you know, Gillette Stadium being built? Like, how does, you know, how do you look at it? Is it the same thing? You get a request for Gillette Stadium, is the same amount of work for that as it is for, you know, title update on my home?
Right. So, I mean, the way we operate as a company is different than most. So if we're doing a residential update for our company, we offer a flat rate nationwide, which would assume that it's all the same work nationwide, but that is just not the case. So in some counties at our flat rate, we will lose money almost every time, for instance, because it's just really difficult to research in that county for county specific reasons. But again, if you're looking just at a residential property, if it's owned by me, David Mitchell, in this county, there's not going to be a lot of documents, right? But if it's somebody who owns a ton of property, if this person, and you may not know the name when you get the order, but if John Rogers happens to own 100 properties in a county, the research on that's going to be 100 times more difficult than somebody else who just owns one. Now, you don't know that when you get into it, but again, you have to look at every document recorded in that county under John Rogers, pull all of them out, read through and find the legal description that is for your specific property. So it's kind of how prolific the person owning the property is in that county is going to determine how hard it is. Great example, anything that's like municipality owned or state owned or federally owned, there's generally thousands, literally thousands of documents you have to sift through to get to what you're doing. So the complexity can vary. If it's a very unique name of a person who only owns one property in a county, it could take you 10 minutes to do the research. If it's somebody who owns a ton of property, it could take you days and days and days to research. And you really don't know. When you put in 123 Main Street, for you as the user, 123 Main Street seems the same as every other address you've ever put in. And we as a research company won't know how difficult it is until we dive into it. But as far as our procedure as a company, we've come up with, you know, the averages on average. Here's a price that works for us, that makes us profitable, makes you so you can tell your clients, here's what the price is at the other end. But the variance on any given property is massively different. It could literally take 10 minutes to do a search, and it could take 10 days to do the search, and you really don't know until you dig into it. You can have some ideas. If it's, like I said, government owned, you're going to know it's going to be pretty difficult. But you just don't know. Does Sean Ferry's own 100 properties or just one in this county? We just don't know until we do it.
Well, that's interesting. Well, what, you know, kind of take it a different kind of tangent off into the question. One of the things that, you know, I started to think about is it seems like it's just done differently all over the place. You got 3,611 different recording outlets that you have to be able to access to provide this nationwide solution. I imagine change happens all the time in those counties. You know, they send out a notice, hey, you know, our office got flooded, or hey, we're going to start bringing our records online. You know, any, you know, legal changes, and my head just starts to spin. Is there anything that, you know, is of interest out there or top of mind with you when you start thinking of any laws that have changed or any change in the title industry in general?
Yeah, I mean, recently the biggest change that's just enacted right now is there's a law called Daniel's Law in New Jersey. And my understanding is a few years ago, very sadly, unfortunately, a judge's son was murdered because the judge had, I'm not sure what exactly happened. Somebody was upset with this judge, used the land records, the online land records, to find out where that judge lived, and went to the house and murdered the son. And so due to this action, they enacted Daniel's Law, I believe 4 years ago. This is when the law passed, but it just recently in January came into effect. what has come from that is, so any judge or civil servant, police officer, a few other different state officials, or their family could ask to have their information redacted from the online records, both assessor records and recorder records. That's what the law was intended to do. And through the law, you had 10 days. The state did 10 days to redact that, to verify that they both qualified for this law, and then also redact their information. As it turns out, the state was inundated with thousands and thousands of requests to do that. And in effect, now all online records for both assessor records and recorder records in the state of New Jersey have been pulled offline, everything. So the only way to do research in New Jersey currently is to actually boots on the ground, walk into the county recorder's office. And what they're doing is verifying your ID before you do research, and then also writing down what property you're researching. So again, if you're doing it for title insurance purposes, for a title update, you have a very valid reason to do it. But obviously, if something nefarious happened at some property later, they could cross-reference these two things to see who was researching that house and whatnot. But it has caused a massive change in how we research in one of the largest states in the country. It's probably the most impactful thing we've had recently.
Is that affecting or impacting turn times or people that have title update
Yes.
requests? Oh, it is.
Massively. I mean, we have, again, depending on the county, some counties have always required us to walk into the recorder's office, but most of the time, those are going to be very rural counties. Think of rural Texas, 500 people live in the county. They don't have online records. So, but, New Jersey is a very big state. A lot of that information was online. And so even when we say things are online, realize a county in Morris County, New Jersey, might have records back to 2000 online. But if the owner has owned it earlier than 2000, you've still had to go into the records room. There's no way to go do it without doing that. But if they bought the property in 2010, you could do the research online. And so you could turn those, generally, if it's online, you can do a quicker turnaround time. At this current moment in time, there is no way to do that research online. You have to walk into the records rooms, and there's no two ways about that at the moment. Now that may change. I do think the state will probably find a way to manage this law better, and maybe they're just inundated now, and in 6 months or a year it'll be different. But as of right now, the entire state of New Jersey has pulled their records offline.
What would you say, the average turn time right now for having to go into the county recorder's office in New Jersey physically? What kind of an impact that should somebody expect time-wise?
I mean, I always say, so the larger the population center, the more researchers we will have, or any company, any competitor of ours as well, would have in that county. So if it's a big county in New Jersey, it's probably not going to delay things too much, because we will already have a lot of people in there at any given time. It'll still delay it some. So our average turnaround time for you guys right now is about 0.75 business days, probably out on half a day, I would say, for sure. But when you get to the more rural counties, it's going to be even more impactful, because you only have a couple researchers, or even no researchers. They maybe go there 1 or 2 days a week. If you think really rural counties, we can't have a researcher sitting there all day, every day, waiting for a search. So they might go to a certain county every few days. But now, if they're impacted with a higher volume, it's going to slow things down even more. So I don't have stats to tell you exactly what those numbers are. We will as we go through this, but it's kind of happening as we're speaking right now. But yeah, the larger counties will be less impacted. The smaller counties will definitely be more impacted.
It's such a tragic thing to come of this. There any other impacts? One of the things that kind of came top of mind when you're thinking that. So, any government official that is getting a construction loan, how does that impact them? Would we be able to even search for title?
No, again, you can. So that the information is, the law says it will only be redacted online. So you can still go in-house and do the records. And to be honest, this is something many states have in place, not quite as robust. But even in California, again, where I'm from, if you can qualify, I'm not exactly sure what the requirements to be a famous person, you can have your information also redacted. It's something that happens. We use a lot of different online databases, and where you'll see a property on a map, and normally you could click on it and see that David Mitchell owns this property. Sometimes you'll click on it and nothing will come up, and often that's because of similar type laws. But this is the most robust law we've seen in the country, and has had by far the biggest impact. I think in part because most of the laws across the country only protect the individual, in this case the judge, whereas this law protects the family as well. And now you're getting a pretty big web of what that can be.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to think of, if it's a positive thing at the end of the day, or does this make it more difficult for lenders to monitor and protect their first lien priority in those situations? And it sounds like, really nothing's changed, just there's more friction to the process of actually getting the information at the end of the day.
It's just going to slow things down. I know, with the construction lenders that we've dealt with, one of the biggest things they're looking for is to get their money out, the draws out as fast as possible to start earning interest. This is just going to slow things down in New Jersey in particular. I don't see anything as far as, risk for lenders, but it will slow getting that money out into the field working for them. That is what I think the impact will be personally.
That's great. We really love the speed and the turn time, and if you're lending in pretty populated or dense areas, you're probably used to having same day endorsements back, which definitely does not get in the way of dispersing funds, getting everything that has to go into that particular process. Now, the cost, the turn time, absolutely amazing. How does this, probably another big question people have, title update versus title endorsement, what are the big differences at the end of the day between the two products?
I mean, the main difference is also, obviously an endorsement is an insurance product, right? So one is an insured product and one is just an update of research on the property. So that being said, like I had said initially, we work with insurance companies. So the research we provide to Land Grill is the exact same research we would provide for an endorsement to a title insurance company. There is no difference in the research itself. So the big difference is if there were an error, that it would be insured against. That is really the difference between the two products.
That's few and far. I don't think in my lifetime I've ever seen a claim off of a mechanics lien endorsement ever. Absolutely ever. Yeah. So no, that's really interesting. And so you're saying that the title update that you offer is probably the research that went into that is probably the same research that's going in when somebody requests an endorsement. So AFX is really powering a lot of the endorsements many construction lenders get today.
For sure. I mean, the other thing I will tell you is most companies, when they go to get their endorsement, are going to go back to the title insurance company that they got the policy from. That's how they get the endorsement, right? The issue that you're going to find, and I found this with plenty of lenders, is so just picture there's two piles of work. So on this pile of work, I'm going to charge $100 for a title update. And this pile of work, I'm going to charge $1,000 for an endorsement. Well, which one is going to get picked first? You're always going to go to the endorsement, the title insurance. The update will be much slower because they're making more money on the other thing, but it is not better for the actual lender. Like if you do the update with us, you're going to get it. Again, we do it with you in 0.75 business days. We prioritize, we are a research company. The insurance company, they have a whole stack of stuff they're getting title insurance policies for that they're making on new policies. They're making more money. Even the endorsement will always be deprioritized. So it's gonna be slower to get your money out for the draws if you're going with an endorsement for sure. And the research is literally exactly the same research. There is nothing different between the two things.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Well, Dave, this has absolutely been a pleasure. I think I've completely run out of questions regarding my infatuation with title endorsements and title updates and the whole research policy that research practice that goes into that. Yeah, I can't thank you enough. But before we leave, I'm going to ask you a couple rapid fire questions that we do at the end of the podcast here. So this may come off as being a surprise, but if you're ready,
I'm ready. Let's bring it on.
Get started here. Any recent books or movies that you would recommend to somebody?
Oh, wow. I just read a book that was called Bootstrapped to Millions, which I thought was amazing, about a gentleman who started a software company, one employee, it was him and one employee, and sold for $100 million. Great. Bootstrapped to Millions, and it's probably 100 pages. So I definitely recommend it.
I don't even have to get the audiobook in that one.
No, you really don't. I read it in like probably 3 hours.
Bootstrapped to Millions. Okay. All right. Second question. What's your favorite interview question when you're hiring somebody?
Oh, my favorite interview question. That's a great one. Man, are you sure you want to work here? I have a pretty small team, but we're pretty tight, and it's a certain type of person that I think wants to work here. So I always ask, "Are you sure this is the right decision for you?" It's a last interview question, but if they answer it right, then it means they got a job normally.
What's the right answer?
It's heck yeah, for sure. You should definitely want to work here. We have a great culture at my company.
Oh no, that's amazing. I can contest to that because we've been dealing with the same people, I think, since we met. So that's
We don't lose clients or employees. We really don't. It's awesome.
Congratulations on that. Now here's another one. Have you ever built your own home?
No, not even close. I'm the least handy person I've ever met, honestly.
Would you ever get a construction loan to build your own home? Could you ever see that as a
Yeah, I think yes, almost for sure. I would love to build my dream home for sure.
Oh, that's
Yes.
awesome. That's awesome. And now I'm out of questions.
Sean, thank you so much for the time. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it.
And we will go ahead and publish your contact information, but if anybody wanted to reach out and get to know more about AFX or contact you, what's the best way to contact you?
The website is afxllc.com. You can email me direct at david.mitchell@afxllc.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it, Sean. Good talking to you.
This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only and does not replace independent professional judgment. Land Gorilla Inc. makes no representations, warranties, or promises for and disclaims any express or implied warranties related to content. Before acting on any information, you should consider the appropriateness of the information as it pertains to your unique business needs.